They said no man could bear to gaze upon him and keep his soul. His face, hidden behind velvet curtains and iron masks, was whispered to be a curse from birth. Courtiers claimed his reflection cracked mirrors. Artists who painted him begged to destroy their works on vanished. One portrait survived, and it screams when the wind howls. In the damp corridors of Castle Weirmont, servants lit candles with trembling hands. The king's presence never needed announcing. Air thickened when he entered, like the castle itself recoiled. Every frame on the wall had been burned, and still the halls were haunted by faces that were no longer there. Faces people feared remembering. His mother went mad before he was 5. His father died screaming in a locked room. The physicians blamed bloodline madness, but whispers told of something darker, a pact inked before birth. It wasn't just a curse of flesh, it was a promise. A warning carved into royal skin, as if by God's own regret. No one dared look at him for long. Not priests, not lovers, not guards. At court gatherings, he stood behind veils while his words were spoken by trembling stewards. But one day, a visiting painter insisted on seeing the king. He said he could capture the truth of his majesty. They granted his wish. He never spoke again. That single painting, oil thick as tar, the canvas warped with age, still exists, locked in a monastery vault. But every few years, someone tries to open that door. A scholar, a thief, a fool. None come back whole. They say it's not a painting anymore. It's a window, and the king inside is still watching. The castle loomed like a dying cathedral, wrapped in fog so thick it felt alive. Ravens perched on blackened gargoyles, watching as a lone carriage creaked up the gravel path. Inside, the painter clutched his satchel of brushes with trembling fingers. He had been summoned, but not by choice. No one refused the crown. The guards who opened the gates never met his eyes. Their armor bore the royal crest, but it was dulled, tarnished, like they'd stopped caring. One stepped aside, whispering something the painter couldn't hear. He noticed their hands, gloved, even in summer. A chill that had nothing to do with weather crawled through him. The butler, an old man with a sunken face, waited at the door. "You are expected," he said without emotion. The walls beyond him were dark wood soaked in candlelight. Heavy curtains blocked the sun. It smelled of wax, mildew, and something else, metallic, bitter. The painter crossed the threshold, feeling swallowed. The halls whispered with footsteps of people unseen. Oil paintings lined the corridor, portraits of monarchs past, grand and grim. But they had all been defaced, each face slashed, burned, or blackened with soot. He stopped at one, a woman with a crown, eyes gouged out. The butler touched his elbow. "Please, do not linger." They reached the royal studio, once a place of art and glory, now boarded like a tomb. Inside, a fire crackled weakly. A throne sat in shadow. "He will be with you shortly," the butler said, closing the door. The painter stood alone, surrounded by cracked easels and shattered frames. Even the brushes on the table were splintered. A door creaked. The painter turned sharply, but no one entered. Instead, a long, cold gust blew through the room, lifting the drapes like ghostly arms. The fireplace sputtered. He saw movement, not in the room, but within a cracked mirror. A figure stood behind him. When he turned, there was only empty space. The king entered with no sound. He moved like fog, slow, shapeless, his form swallowed in a heavy crimson robe. His face was hidden beneath a veil, thin enough to hint at what lay beneath. "You will paint me," the voice rasped. "Neither young nor old, not quite human. You will capture my truth." The painter bowed, heart hammering. "Your Majesty," but words failed. The king stepped closer. From beneath the veil, eyes burned. 2 sunken coals, in a death-pale mask. The stench hit next. Rot, old blood, candle wax, uninfected flesh. "You've painted royalty before," the king said, "but never what they truly are." The painter was shown to his chamber, a stone room with no windows, only a narrow slit for light. The bed was cold iron, the only furniture, a desk, a basin, and the unfinished canvas waiting on its easel. Each night, he dreamt of flames devouring a faceless man, and each morning, he painted as command. Servants brought meals without faces, veiled, silent, vanishing before he could speak. He never heard footsteps. Only the knock, then nothing. He asked for fresh brushes once, and found a bundle on his pillow, wrapped in velvet, soaked faintly in what looked like blood. The smell was familiar, metallic, human. He didn't ask again. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time slipped in the castle like breath through grave dust. He painted, scraped, and reaped. The king never sat still, only paced, muttering to himself in Latin, French, tongues the painter didn't recognize. Each time he removed the veil, something inside the painter shriveled. He began to lose color in his skin. Once, the painter tried to leave his room at night. The handle burned his palm. Not hot, but cold, frostbitten. He awoke the next day with a bruise on his shoulder, and no memory of how. That night, a note appeared under his pillow. "You are here until it's done." No signature, just black ink. The king finally asked to see the portrait. The painter hesitated. He'd painted it as faithfully as possible. The sunken jaw, the necrotic lips, the abscessed flesh, hidden beneath the crown. "Is this what I look like to you?" the king whispered. The painter couldn't answer. The king laughed, a sound like teeth rattling. "You've captured the wrong curse," he hissed. He reached for the canvas with skeletal fingers and scratched at it, tearing his painted face. "I wanted my truth, not my horror." The painter fell to his knees. "Then you must show me what truth means, Your Majesty." The king turned. "Truth is what you fear to see." That night, the painter's dreams were vivid. He stood in the gallery again, surrounded by royal portraits. But now, the eyes blinked, the mouths opened, they screamed in silence. He saw his own face among them, disfigured, pale, locked in terror. He woke screaming. Blood had been smeared on the mirror in his room. He was never allowed outside. When he asked about the garden glimpsed from a tower, the servant whispered, "No one goes there. The queen sleeps there still." When he asked about the queen, they pretended not to hear. But later, he found a portrait under a cloth. A woman, regal and rotted, smiling with no eyes. The painter asked to leave, just once. The king said nothing, only nodded. The next day, the painter found his carriage ready. No one spoke. But as he passed the gate, he looked back. Every window of the castle was filled with faces, blank, pale, watching. Every one of them looked like him. He returned home, broken, thin as bone, unable to speak for weeks. He hid the portrait in his basement, behind bricks, behind salt. But at night, he still heard the king's voice whisper, "Truth has a face." One day, he went down to burn the painting, but it was gone. Only ashes remained, and a crown. Rumors spread the painter refused all commissions. He never touched a brush again. They said he'd gone mad, that he muttered about a king who wasn't alive, that he once stabbed his own reflection, thinking it smiled back. But no one believed him. No one, except those who heard the whispers from their own mirrors. Years passed, and the painter died quietly. But after his burial, the caretaker reported something strange. His grave wouldn't stay covered, dirt scattered, the coffin clawed from inside. They sealed it with stone. Then, iron but still, claw marks appeared. One day, a visitor swore they saw someone standing by the grave, wearing a crimson robe. In the royal records, the king's name is blotted out. His paintings are missing. His rule is not acknowledged. The only proof he existed lies in whispers, buried in the basement of history, and in one faded canvas, too horrifying to display, but still warm to the touch, as if it breathes. The first night after the portrait was unveiled, the castle halls fell into unnatural silence. The wind, once a gentle whisper through the stained glass windows, now howled like a grieving widow. Servants avoided the eastern wing, murmuring of shadows that moved where no candlelight touched. Something had awakened within the paint, something ancient. The king's eyes in the painting glowed faintly beneath the moonlight that spilled through the oculus. Guards posted near the throne room refused to stay past the hour of midnight, citing nausea, headaches, and night terrors. The archbishop suggested exorcism, but the king, he stared at it longer each night, as if listening. No one saw the painter again. His carriage left before dawn, escorted by 2 monks, in a silence no one dared disturb. A footman who peered into his abandoned chamber claimed the mirrors were all shattered inward. A single word was scrawled across the frost-glazed window. By the 3rd day, every caged bird in the aviary had died. Not from disease, but from crashing into the walls in a panic. The royal hounds refused to enter the great hall. A servant girl, Elspeth, screamed when dusting the portrait and was found weeping uncontrollably, unable to speak. Her hair turned white overnight. Rumors spread faster than plague. Some claimed the king had made a pact, a desperate bargain sealed in blood and brush. Others whispered of ancient rites hidden in the painter's ancestry, of canvas woven from shrouds, paint mixed with bone dust. The archbishop burned incense daily, but the scent only seemed to thicken the dread. On the 5th night, Lady Adeline crept toward the portrait after the court had retired. She had loved the king once, before the war, before the scars, before the madness. As she reached for his painted cheek, the flame in her candle extinguished. In the dark, the eyes blinked. She collapsed at dawn. The physician found her heartbeat irregular, her pupils dilated, her fingers curled as if grasping invisible threads. She whispered of a crown made of thorns, of echoes from beneath the floor, of a voice behind the frame. The court dismissed her as hysterical, but no one visited the hall again. The king, however, grew obsessed. He sat for hours before the painting, murmuring in forgotten tongues. He spoke less to his advisors and more to the image. He claimed it gave him answers, clearer than counsel, truer than prophecy. "It knows," he said. "It sees through time. It remembers when I was whole." In the east tower, the steward found a trail of footprints leading up the stairs. Wet, though it hadn't rained. They stopped at a window. No one could explain them. The queen refused to sleep in the castle that night. "The canvas breathes," she told the nuns. "I heard it whisper my name." An old scribe, assigned to copy the royal lineage scrolls, uncovered a disturbing detail. The king's great-grandfather, also disfigured by war, had commissioned a painting, which was later burned. Its painter disappeared. The family crest, usually an eagle, bore a faded serpent under layers of varnish. "It runs in the blood," the scribe muttered. Thunder cracked the night sky on the seventh day. The painting glistened with dew indoors. Lightning lit up the hall, and for a second, everyone saw it. The figure behind the king in the portrait had moved, its hand now pointed outward, toward the throne, toward whoever dared sit there next. Guards fled the chamber, candles flickered and burst. The royal herald fainted while reciting a decree. The palace steward begged the king to remove the portrait, but the king, pale and trembling, simply said, "It has already chosen. The throne is merely a vessel. The curse must continue." The archbishop locked himself in the crypt, chanting psalms. Bells rang with no wind. The painter's discarded tools, buried in the courtyard, were found rearranged in the shape of a sigil. A royal guard tried to destroy the painting with a sword. The blade snapped, and he screamed as blood poured from his eyes. By the 8th day, not a soul stepped near the great hall. The castle grew colder, fires burned lower. The king's voice echoed differently. "Doubled," some said, like someone else spoke with him, a deep resonant tone beneath his own. Servants crossed themselves and whispered, "The portrait is not finished." And on the 9th night, as the full moon loomed, the king vanished. His robes were folded neatly at the foot of the throne. No struggle, no blood, only the painting remained. And now, the figure in the throne within it wore his crown, his wounds, his eyes, and they were watching. The throne room stood frozen in time. Dust clung to velvet curtains, draping like funeral shrouds. No one had sat on the king's seat in weeks, maybe months. Servants whispered of something unnatural in the air, how the room rejected anyone but him. Even the guards avoided eye contact with the carved lion heads. Each morning, the court painter returned, sketchbook trembling. He had painted kings before, mad, cruel, even dying, but none like this. He'd seen eyes blink from canvas, seen breath, frost glass behind him. The palace was silent but alive. Somewhere within the stone walls, something watched him, waited, breathed. He kept painting, not by will, but compulsion. Hands moved without command, conjuring images from dreams he never remembered. The king's features distorted further, each day, mouth too wide, eyes too black, cheeks sunken like a corpse, but the painter couldn't stop. He begged for rest. They locked his door tighter. No portrait ever matched the real king. One day, His Highness would arrive in silence, cloak rustling like dead leaves, face half hidden. Each time, the painter would flinch, and each time, the king would smile, voice hollow, continue. No praise, no complaint, just that single word, like a command from something beneath flesh. Whispers spread beyond the palace. Townspeople spoke of screams inside the castle of children, who pointed at windows and cried, "Monster!" A merchant swore he saw the king's reflection walk away from him in a silver mirror. A butcher claimed his dog wouldn't stop barking at a painted portrait brought to town square. The clergy arrived to bless the palace. But as the incense wafted through the halls, the youngest monk went pale, dropped his censer, and ran. "It's not him," he cried. "It wears him like clothing." They exiled him quietly, branded a heretic, but even the high bishop refused to stay overnight. One dawn, the painter awoke to find the canvas had changed. The king's eyes had shifted position, pupils misaligned. The background had bled black behind the throne, stained with shapes like shadows clawing upward. But he hadn't painted that. He hadn't touched it in 2 days. His brushes lay dry, untouched. He ran to the steward. "Something's wrong with the portrait," but the man only narrowed his eyes, muttered prayers, and turned him away. "It's what he asked for," was all he said. The painter wanted to scream. He felt like a prisoner inside a ritual, unknowingly sketching madness onto linen. The next night, the painter dreamt of the throne room submerged in water. The king sat beneath the surface, skin gray, bloated, crown slipping. Portraits floated around him, all burning beneath the waves, crackling silently. When he woke, his ears bled. On his canvas, a single wet fingerprint trailed down the frame. Paranoia bloomed across the palace. Courtiers stopped visiting. Guards refused night duty near the portrait chamber. A maid slit her wrists, muttering, "He called me by name, but he doesn't know me." Servants started burning candles in every hallway, but the shadows only grew longer. The king never left his chamber. Then came the day of ceremonia, the anniversary of the king's coronation. Nobles were summoned, bells tolled, hollow and cracked. The throne room was lit with hundreds of candles, golden and shaken. The king's new portrait would be unveiled, but even before it dropped, several nobles fainted. They smelled something foul. When the cloth fell, gasps echoed. The portrait showed a face that wasn't human. Its mouth was a jagged red hole. The crown sat atop a head wrapped in thorns, but most horrifying, its eyes glowed, subtly, even in candlelight. "That's not art," a duchess sobbed. "It's looking at us." The king rose slowly. His boots made no sound. He stood beside the painting and stared at it for a long while. Then he turned to the crowd and smiled. "This is truth," he said. "This is who I've always been. No one clapped, no one moved. One lord vomited on the floor. From that day, the throne room was sealed. Portraits vanished from halls. All paintings of past rulers were taken down, shredded, or burned. It was as if the royal family wanted history erased like. The king was rewriting bloodlines with his own cursed image. Children were told not to speak of it. In private, the painter wept. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. He had painted something alive, something that fed on memory and worship. He begged the steward for release, for exile, for death. But the steward only replied, "You were chosen. It lives through you now." They gave him another canvas. And then the king began requesting portraits of others. The prime minister, the queen's brother, a foreign ambassador. But when the paintings were finished, each subject went mad or died within days. One hung himself in the stables, whispering, "He showed me what I am." Another set her dress on fire. It became clear these weren't portraits, they were traps. Mirrors of the soul twisted by something ancient. The palace became a gallery of horror, lit dimly, faces melting into oil and cloth. Tourists were no longer invited. The palace gates closed. A kingdom fell silent beneath the weight of fear. Soon, the painter lost all memories of his past. His name faded, his dreams blurred. He lived only to paint. Each canvas revealed faces he didn't recognize till one day, he painted his own. Not as he was, but disfigured, hollow-eyed, wearing a crown made of bone. When he screamed, no one came. In a final act of defiance, the palace librarian tried to document it, all names, portraits, symptoms, disappearances. He stored them in a hidden vault. But when guards opened his chamber days later, they found only ink splattered across the walls in spirals. His body had no mouth, only blacks. The throne itself had changed. What once was oak and gold now looked like rotted flesh carved into shape. Courtiers claimed it pulsed, beating like a heart when unobserved. Some said they saw veins, others refused to look. The king sat there daily, silent, unmoving, as if feeding on stillness. Foreign kingdoms grew suspicious. Emissaries sent were either turned away or never returned. Rumors whispered through trade routes of a king cursed by truth, whose portrait spoke riddles in the dark. One general claimed a letter written in ash arrived at his tent. "Don't gaze, don't follow, don't paint what you fear." Some brave souls infiltrated the palace, hoping to assassinate him. None succeeded. They were found painting walls with their own blood, eyes wide, whispering the king's name over and over. The guards stopped arresting them. They simply walled them into forgotten rooms, letting the castle swallow them like wine into stone. The painter, now gaunt and pale, finished one final piece, a portrait of the throne itself. Beneath it, he wrote 3 words in blood: "The hollow awaits." Then he vanished. Some say he was pulled into the painting. Others claim he became the frame, but no one ever found his body. The bells tolled, slow and hollow, as if mourning a future not yet born. The stone walls of Edivane Castle shivered with each chime, ancient echoes rippling through time. The throne room stood draped in velvet shadows, heavy with dust and breathless anticipation. Outside, snow fell like ash. Inside, silence ruled before the crown. Servants moved like phantoms through the grand hall, eyes lowered, steps muted, as though fearful of waking something buried. Every candle flickered violently, protesting the very air. Nobles arrived clothed in mourning colors, despite it being a coronation. Whispers slithered through the corridors. "He's not fit. He's not human. He should not reign." The crown sat on crimson velvet, untouched since his father's last breath. Gold vines twisted like thorns around it, as if reluctant to grace another skull. No music played, no choir sang. The master of ceremony trembled as he held the scroll with both hands. Knuckles bumped. A crow landed on the sill and did not leave. When the doors creaked open, all turned, but none dared speak. There, standing between the cracked pillars, was the new king, draped in a cloak stitched from shadows, his face shrouded beneath a black veil. What little of his form they could see looked warped, unnatural, not born of man or god. Yet none dared protest. He walked without sound. Not even his boots struck stone. The silence around him grew oppressive, a silence thick as oil. As he passed each noble, they bowed not from reverence, but dread. Even the stained-glass saints above looked away, their painted eyes weeping colors across the marble floor. The air had returned to claim the void. He approached the throne like a man greeting his tomb. The high-arched ceilings moaned as if burdened by his presence. The velvet carpet beneath him rippled slightly, as though the castle itself recoiled. His fingers long, pale, and too many jointed, twitched at his side, flexing like claws. The guards did not move an inch. A high priest stood trembling near the steps, reciting sacred words that had not been uttered in a century. But the king did not kneel. He simply stared from beneath his veil. The priest faltered, stammering. His throat closed tight, and blood dribbled from his nose. The scripture burst into flames in his trembling hands. No one spoke, no one gasped. It was as if the entire court had rehearsed this nightmare and accepted it as law. The king turned slowly, and the hall bowed again. Not out of duty, but survival. When he finally ascended these steps, the throne didn't creak its side. as if it remembered him, as if it wept. He sat. The metal screamed. The gold vines curled tighter around his form, locking in place as if claiming him. The crown floated just above his head, held by no hand. Lightning flashed outside, and for a moment, his face was visible, melted, cursed, stitched across centuries of grief. One lady fainted. Another fell to her knees sobbing. The coronation concluded not with applause, but with the extinguishing of every torch in the hall. The light fled first, then sound, then hope. When the chamber doors opened again, no one remembered who they were. Titles forgotten, ranks erased. There was only the king, his throne, and the eternal quiet that had crowned him. The doors closed behind them with a soft groan, but inside the throne room, that sound echoed like thunder. No birds chirped beyond the stained glass. No wind stirred the crimson banners. Even the flickering candle flames had stilled, as if frozen mid. It was as though time refused to move forward under his gaze. The nobles were led out in pairs, stiff, silent, barely breathing. Some had wet streaks down their faces. Others whispered prayers into bloodless hands. One young scribe vomited behind a pillar, clutching an ink-stained scroll that now read only one word: stillborn. His master slapped him across the mouth, but even his anger sounded small. Behind the throne, a veil of shadows rippled like a living curtain. From within, the old court jester stepped forward. Except he was dead. Everyone knew that. Hanged 20 years prior. And yet there he was, crooked hat and all, playing a broken lute. No one dared speak. Not even the Queen Mother, who trembled behind her fan. The jester played a single string again and again, a shrill note, like a scream that had forgotten how to die. The king never turned, never flinched, but his hand tightened on the armrest, and a spider fell dead at his feet. Then two, then a dozen, as if the castle itself began to exhale its sins. Beneath the throne, something moved. Just slightly. A crawling sound, too deliberate to be imagined. The guards didn't react, but sweat poured down their necks. One knight coughed and dropped his spear. It didn't hit the floor, it vanished. Swallowed mid-air, like the room itself had chosen silence over steel. The king finally spoke. 3 words, and nothing more. Let me know. The black-draped halls of the royal basilica were hushed with dread, the air thick with waxen whispers. No horns were blown, no choirs rehearsed. A coronation without celebration had never occurred before, but no one dared speak of joy, not when the new king's face had to be hidden behind 10 layers of silk. Outside the gates, peasants kneeled in the freezing mud, heads bowed so low, they trembled in fear more than reverence. Mothers pressed children's eyes shut, as though his presence could rot innocence. A soldier dropped his spear, as the heavy bells tolled once for death, twice for succession, and a final chime for the silence to begin. Beneath the shadow of the cathedral's spire, 6 cardinals waited with their heads down, fingers trembling on the ceremonial texts. Father Damar, oldest among them, had refused to preside. He claimed he saw the devil's grin behind the veil and screamed until they locked him in the crypt. Inside the vestry, the new Mana sat, slouched on a throne of carved obsidian, shivering not from cold but from something deeper, something within. They had doused his robes in frankincense and myrrh, yet the foul stench of rot seeped through. One servant fainted while trying to tie his boots. The artist who painted the ceremonial banner had gouged his own eyes out 2 nights prior. I saw the truth, he'd mumbled, blood trailing down his cheeks like ink. His face. It moves. It moves when you're not looking. The banner was burned. No replacement was commissioned. The coronation crown, forged in gold and set with cursed sapphires, had been placed on a velvet pillow beside him. None dared place it on his head. At last it was a trembling child priest, no more than 12, who was pushed forward. He wept as he raised it, his small arms quivering under the weight. The king did not rise. He only turned his head slowly and the boy collapsed, convulsing. Blood streamed from his nose, eyes rolled back, yet no one ran to help. They had been warned, do not interrupt, do not draw attention, do not look too long. His crown rested on his head now, but no one cheered. Lady Belgrave, the Duchess of Eldenmore, gasped and clutched her throat. He looked at me, she whispered, before her face twisted grotesquely. Her eyes sank in, her jaw dislocated, and she collapsed like a puppet with its strings severed. 2 guards dragged her corpse away, praying under their breath, avoiding the king's gaze. The official scribe wrote nothing. His hands refused to move. The parchment stayed blank, the ink drying stiff on the quill. He would later be found in his chambers, walls covered in thousands of scrawled words. He is not the blood of men. He is not the child we crowned. Outside, lightning cracked, though the sky was clear. The wind howled without reason. Dogs barked at walls, and horses foamed at the mouth. The very earth trembled, not from storm or quake, but from something waking something old and buried, that stirred at the touch of the obsidian throne. No hymns were sung. The choir was disbanded after the soprano spoke in tongues during rehearsal and bit through her own tongue. She had screamed a name none recognized. The name had not been spoken in 400 years, last etched in a scroll that told of a king who lived beneath the floorboards of time. Whispers spread among the clergy. They believed the boy they crowned was not born of the late queen. Rumors spoke of a midwife who vanished the night he was delivered. Some swore a wolf had given birth in the royal chamber. Others believed the child had no shadow until his 5th birthday. The sword of sanctification, meant to be held by the new king, had shattered when brought near. A priest who tried to bless him burst into flames. The tapestries that bore his image twisted during the ceremony, showing monstrous outlines behind his silhouette, as if something moved just beneath the embroidery. In the royal gallery, all portraits of former monarchs were turned inward. Their eyes, it was said, bled paint the night before. One curator had caught sight of their mouths changing, each one silently screaming, as though they sensed what now occupied their lineage. The royal ring, passed through generations, could not fit his finger. It twisted, melted, then reformed into a blackened spiral. A scholar who witnessed it muttered, "An Ouroboros in Havisi," before biting off his own tongue and crawling into the cellar, never to return. She bolted down the central aisle, heels echoing like gunshots, sobbing. The king turned slightly no more than an inch and she stopped mid. Her body froze, suspended like a puppet on invisible threads. Slowly, she disintegrated into ash. The guards swept her remains without a word. The coronation ended not with applause, but with silence so heavy it felt physical. No feasts followed. No announcements were made. The people were dismissed with no decree. Those who attended walked backward from the cathedral, never turning their backs until they reached the gate, as instructed. The new king did not speak, not once. Not even a breath escaped him. Some swore they saw his lips move, forming ancient syllables that didn't match any language. Others claimed they heard a whisper beneath their skin, as if something inside them had been seated that day. When the black carriage returned him to the palace, birds fell from the sky mid-flight. The fountain, in the eastern square, turned red, thick and metallic. Fish in the royal pond floated about. The air grew 10 degrees colder, though the sun still shone. In the servants' quarters, all mirrors were covered in black cloth. Reflections had started showing things not present in the room. One maid saw her own head turn and smile at her before vanishing. Another screamed for 7 minutes straight before her throat collapsed. In the royal library, a book not catalogued was found open on the king's desk. It was bound in skin, its language indecipherable, its pages turned without hands. The librarian who touched it began bleeding from his ears and disappeared 3 nights later. No one replaced him. In the weeks that followed, the king remained inside the Hall of Thorns, a wing of the palace sealed for over 2 centuries. Screams echoed from within. Windows were bricked up. Servants only entered by crawling, blindfolded, and speaking backwards, as decreed in the new court's rules. A new law was passed. No image may bear His Majesty's likeness. Painters who disobeyed were taken by black-cloaked knights and never seen again. One artist's final brushstroke moved when he died, reshaping the king's eye into a spiral that bled through the canvas for days. The cathedral bells have not rung since. The bishop set them ablaze and leaped into the fire. His final words, "I will not be part of this." The fire burned for 13 days. The bells, however, remained intact. Their metal warped into faces, silent, screaming faces. Children across the kingdom began drawing a figure in red robes, faceless, standing in doorways. When asked, they whispered, "He watches when you sleep." Some stopped speaking entirely. Others drew spirals on every surface until their fingers bled. A few vanished in the night, leaving behind only shadows on their bedsheet. The coronation of silence, as it came to be known, was struck from all official records. But the people remembered. Their eyes remained low. Their homes were painted with salt and blood. They burned their portraits and refused to name their king, lest the syllables rot their tongues. In distant monasteries, monks lit forbidden candles and opened scrolls not read in centuries. They spoke of a 13th throne, one not meant for men but mistaken by desperate hands. They feared it had been claimed again, and that the veil between worlds had thinned beyond repair. Now, at night, the palace glows faintly red through its shuttered windows. Whispers drift down alleyways. Crows gather in unnatural numbers. Those who stare too long into the woods say they hear music-low droning, unholy. They say it comes from the throne room, but no one enters anymore. And the king, they say, still sits never moving, never aging, never speaking. But sometimes, if you look too long at the palace walls, you'll swear you see a face watching back, and it changes every time. The wind moaned like a dying man outside the stone corridors of the palace, dragging dust along the walls, as if trying to erase memories. Inside the East Wing, a long-forgotten hall stirred to life for the first time in decades. This was the gallery of Isa Corridor, so cursed that even whispers avoided it. Dusty oil portraits lined the walls, all draped in tattered velvet covers. Not a single image was left exposed. The few servants who had dared peek beneath those covers decades ago had either clawed their own eyes out or vanished into madness. The room was padlocked after the last incident. Until tonight, young Father Anselm, summoned by royal decree, stood trembling at the gallery's threshold. He held a small vial of holy water, the weight of its purpose far greater than its size. Behind him, 2 guards stood stiff, refusing to cross the threshold. The door creaked open. The gallery was thick with moldy silence. Paint flaked off the ceiling like diseased skin. Anselm walked slowly, his robes brushing the floor, candlelight flickering in his grip. Every step echoed unnaturally, as if the corridor were deeper than its physical length. The eyes, even hidden, were watching. He stopped in front of the first portrait. The plaque beneath read, King Roderick IV, 1422 to 1445. With trembling fingers, Anselm pulled back the velvet. What lay beneath wasn't a painting, it was a frozen scream. The king's eyes were wide, mouth contorted in eternal agony, but the paint seemed wet. The pupils shimmered, as though alive. Anselm recoiled, muttering Latin prayers. The eyes followed him as he stepped away. Behind him, the guards gasped and ran. He was alone now, his candle flickering dangerously, but something stronger than fear kept him moving. He had to find that portrait the one legend warned them about. King Edric the Hollow. The name alone sent shivers through monastic libraries, wrapped in superstitions and sealed books. No official portrait had survived public viewing, but in this gallery, Anselm knew he would find it. He passed queens with stitched smiles and princes with wolfish eyes. Each portrait screamed through silence, begging to be forgotten. Finally, he reached the final canvas, its frame larger than the others, almost ceremonial. The plaque had been scratched out violently, but Anselm knew. His hand hesitated over the velvet. It twitched, as if the cloth breathed. With a prayer on his lips, he yanked it down, and then the gallery exhaled. There he was, not as a man, not as a king, but as something else entirely. Edric's face was not deformed, it was unfinished, as if the brush had given up. One half was majestic, carved with royal pride. The other was a void, an abyss of black oil and spiraling strokes. And yet, both eyes glowed red, bleeding down the canvas like tears of flame. The air turned rancid, the walls pulsed. Anselm dropped to his knees, vomiting bile. The face stared directly into his soul, tearing through years of priesthood and revealing the child he once was, powerless and forgotten. Behind him, he heard the gallery doors slam shut. He was trapped, but something moved. Within the painting, the void side began to swirl. Not illusion movement, flesh and paint, oil bubbling. The other portraits along the gallery began shaking violently on their nails. Screams not imagined, but actual filled the air. Faces began to melt on the walls. Eyeballs bulged from the paintings, dripping crimson. Anselm crawled backward, arms shaking. The candle extinguished itself with a hiss. In darkness, he felt something cold and smooth slither across his leg. He whimpered, and then a voice, ancient and hollow, filled the gallery. You dared summon me without a throne. The voice came from everywhere, but mostly from inside. You wear a robe, but your blood is no purer than theirs, it spat. Anselm clutched his cross. The air grew heavier, pressing down like a tomb collapsing. From the painting, a hand reached out, charred bone and velvet sleeve. It beckoned. Do you wish to see the crown? They feared. Anselm wept, his eyes burning. What do you I am what they buried. I am the stain on the royal bloodline. I am the king that never died, only forgotten. Suddenly, Anselm was lifted into the air by invisible force. The paintings tore from the walls one by one, consumed by fireless flames. The gallery twisted, spiraled, reshaped itself. Anselm saw visions, centuries of kings, queens, priests all kneeling before this thing, as it whispered madness into their ears. I was crowned in silence. My anthem is screams. My kingdom is memory. Anselm was thrown into the throne-shaped frame. It absorbed him. His face pressed into the canvas, oil burning into his pores. He screamed as his body melted, not into death but into paint. A new portrait began forming, slowly, meticulously, beside Edric. A priest, mouth agape, eyes shattered, eternally frozen in terror. The gallery of eyes had claimed another, and outside, the wind suddenly stopped howling, as if it too now listened instead of speaking. In the dead silence of dawn, when the sun had not yet dared to rise, and the shadows stretched unnaturally long, a single candle burned inside the palace chapel. But unlike other flames, this one flickered in reverse, its wax reforming, its light pulling darkness inward instead of casting it out, and it had no wick. They said the candle had once stood at the bedside of Queen Isidora, the pale, on the night she vanished. Now it sat atop the black altar of the chapel that no one entered willingly. The monks called it the last flame, but those who truly understood whispered its true name, the candle that burned backwards. Brother Thorn had been summoned from the mountain monastery after the gallery of eyes consumed Father Anselm. Unlike others, Thorn did not flinch in the face of cursed things. He had studied darkness, not to worship it but to recognize its fingerprints. Still, when he saw the candle, he felt something inside him loosen. The chapel's walls wept. Actual tears dripped from the old stone, thick and reddish. The pews were empty, covered in cobwebs that pulsed, like they were breathing. Thorn approached the altar, and as he did, the candle flared backward, its flames shrinking into itself, devouring time rather than heat. He touched it, time hiccuped, Suddenly the air shifted. He wasn't alone. He turned, and there her dress fluttered in phantom wind, soaked in a memory of wine-colored blood. Her eyes were sewn shut, yet she stared directly at him. Her lips moved without sound. Thorn blinked. She was gone. But the pews were now filled with silent kings and queens, all long dead. Each royal stared at him, unmoving, unblinking. They did not breathe. They did not age. Their skin was porcelain, cracked like dried riverbeds. And at the altar, the candle reversed again. The wax raced up into form. But now there were 2 candles. The past was duplicating, time folding, the kingdom remembering itself. A deep moan rippled through the chapel floor. Beneath the altar, stone shifted. Thorn knelt and lifted the cloth. A trapdoor, he hesitated. Then, gripping a rusted iron ring, he pulled. Dust bellowed upward like a ghost exhaling. Below, a stairwell spiraled into black. He took a deep breath. Each step he took whispered names. Names not in books. Names erased by royal decree. Names that once ruled, then were condemned to unhappening. Down, down, into the marrow of the palace, until he reached the chamber of the candle's origin, and in the center he found the wax throne, not made of wood, not made of gold, but of solid candle wax, melted, reformed, and melted again over centuries, and atop it sat a child, a little girl, eyes black as void, skin flickering like flame. "You found me?" she said, voice layered with dozens more. "But do you know what you've lit?" Thorn said nothing. He only held out his crucifix. The girl blinked. Suddenly, the cross caught fire, not burning with flame, but disintegrating into backward ash, reforming into a branch, then bark, then seed. It dropped to the floor and vanished into the stone. The girl smiled. "Even your symbols obey time in here." Then her face shifted. It stretched, grew older. She became Queen Isadora, then younger, then older again. She cycled through centuries of phases each time, her eyes staring deeper into Thorn. "I was the first flame. I was their light. But they snuffed me out for speaking the future." Now the wax throne wept. A sticky flood of molten time began pouring down its steps, moving toward Thorn's feet. He backed away, but the candle above still and altar flared again. The chapel above and chamber below were mirrors. The altar was the crown, the candle, the scepter, and the throne, the soul of the kingdom. "You lit the final echo," she said. "Now all who burn must return." Suddenly, the royals in the chapel above began to twitch. Their heads turned, their necks cracked, their roses won. Not alive, not dead, but restored to the moment they were most feared. One queen bled from her eyes, smiling. A king dragged a noose behind him like a robe. Thorn raced back up the stairwell as the chamber collapsed behind him. The child's laughter echoed through walls. He emerged into a chapel ablaze with inverted fire ice golden whispering. The 2 candles had become 4, each burned in reverse, and the royals began to march. Their footsteps left no sound. The palace shifted again. Rooms folded like origami. Windows blinked. Corridors rearranged. The castle was no longer a structure, it was memory in motion. And Thorn, the accidental trigger, now stood at the center of its unfolding. He looked to the candles. "What do you want?" he whispered. A voice spoke not from one mouth, but from all portrait. To be remembered wrong. That's when he understood. The curse was not in what had happened, but in how it had been rewritten. The candle burned backward to erase truth. Twofold horrors into fairy tales. It was not a light, it was a historian, a liar, a mouthpiece for royal sins, dressed in sanctified silence. The palace had protected its line by twisting time, each evil act erased by ritual, each successor sworn to memory, not truth. The child on the wax throne wasn't a spirit, she was a secret. A royal daughter buried in ink, her story reversed until she became a curse instead of a crown. But now, she was burning forward. Thorn turned and ran. He needed to warn someone, anyone. But as he fled through twisting corridors, he realized every door led him back to the chapel. He was the loop's prisoner now. In the center, the candles burned brighter. The past refused to die. And at the altar, a 5th candle appeared. It bore his face. Brother Thorn stood before it, soaked in ancient wax and bleeding from the nose. Time no longer moved in lines around him. Past, present, and future, tangled like spiderwebs. Each thread sticky with royal secrets. The candles had marked him. He was now a flicker in the fabric of memory. But even as history tried to erase or absorb him, something deeper pushed him forward. The truth. The final truth. The door did not ask for keys. It demanded sacrifice, and it got one. As Thorn placed his hand on the stone, A sliver of his soul peeled off his last innocent memory. Gone. The door opened soundlessly. The air was thick as syrup. Black vines clung to the ceiling, pulsing gently like lungs. The floor was mosaic tile, showing scenes of kings being crowned, beheaded, reborn. The chamber itself had no walls, only curtains made of stitched royal robes, some still blue. And in the center of it all sat 12 thrones. None faced forward. All were turned to the walls, and on each throne sat a monarch whose name had been struck from time. Some wore nooses instead of crowns. Some were missing faces. All of them breathed in silence. Thorn stepped forward. They turned all at once, not with their bodies, with their memories. The moment he crossed the veil, the room remembered it had once been a cathedral, a courtroom, a dungeon. It relived itself through him. Every breath he took resurrected a truth. The kings began to speak not aloud, but through feeling, regret, rage, betrayal. Thorn saw a king who had fed a famine by burning the poor to warm the elite. Another who sealed his daughter in a wall because she dreamt of rebellion. A queen who rewrote centuries by marrying her shadow and banishing the sun from history. None of them were in books. All of them were buried by decree. Then he saw the 13th throne, empty, made of bones wrapped in children's blankets. Its presence hurt to look at, not physically but emotionally, cosmically. It was the throne of the first lie, the moment royalty realized it could erase itself. Thorn approached it, trembling. On the seat sat a small object, a crown, made of paper and dipped in blood. A child's crown. Beside it, a scroll sealed in wax with the mark of the same candle that now flickered across the palace chapel. He broke the seal. Inside was the first decree ever made in the palace's foundation. Let the kingdom forget what it costs to stay clean. Suddenly, the thrones groaned. The kings stood. They moved slowly, broken by the weight of their own edits. Time had bound them here as punishment, not for the crimes they committed but for refusing to carry the memory of them. Now Thorn had seen, he had felt, and that meant something ancient could end, or something darker could begin. The 13th throne shift no longer empty. A figure now sat there, wrapped in golden veils. Its face was thousands of names all spoken at once. It opened its mouth and spoke a single word: confess. The chamber lit with inverted flame. A spotlight of memory burned over Thorn. He tried to run, but the chamber reshaped itself with each step. Hallways of regret, doors that led only backward. He screamed, and it echoed with every lie he had ever believed. His childhood, his faith, his mission, all had been guided by rewritten history. He was a child of false memory. The kings surrounded him now, not to punish but to offer a choice. Would he become the 13th? Would he sit upon the throne and ensure the palace never forgot again? Or would he turn away, return to the surface, and let the cycle repeat? His silence was his answer. He walked to the throne. As he sat, the other 12 bowed. The candle in the chapel above flared forward for the first time. Light, pure and fierce, shattered stained glass across the palace. The gallery of eyes closed. The chapel collapsed into ash. And from the tower roofs gargoyles wept with joy or fear, it was hard to tell. The palace itself shifted on its foundation. Beneath it, old bones turned to dust. The child queen's laughter faded into a lullaby. Time resumed, but not as it was, as it should have been. Thorn never left the chamber, but his story spread, told in dreams, in fevered whispers of children who saw the candle burning the right way, of paintings that wept, of kings who bled ink instead of blood. And in a new chapel, far away, a single candle burned honestly, not backward, not forward, but steady. It had no wick. It needed none. Its fire was memory, and its keeper was watching. There is a garden behind the palace. It is never spoken of in blueprints, never shown in royal maps. It lies past the whispering corridor, beneath the hill of broken sundials, where the soil is warm, even in snow. They call it the place where no flower grows, yet the air smells of roots that never die. Only the dead remember the path, and Thorn, though unalive in time, remembered enough. It began with silence, not the sacred kind, nor the guilty one, but a fertile, hollow silence that breathed under his feet. The 13th throne had marked him. He could no longer bleed, yet every heartbeat rang like a church bell at midnight. In his chest was a new thinga seed, not of hope, but of memory too raw to forget. The kings had given him the choice, but the soil gave him the price. The garden waited. He walked alone, followed by shadows that once called him brother. His robes were ash now. His candle melted into his palm like a scar. The ground softened beneath each step, not with moss, but with hair human, woven, brushed daily by hands, long gone. The vines didn't grow. They remembered. They whispered every step taken by those who'd vanished here. The soil was speech. The roots were secrets. The garden was awake. He reached the center. A fountain of stone, dry as bone, stood at the heart. No water, only coins. Each one marked with a face that no longer existed in history. Forgotten emperors, child queens, fools who'd seen too much. It was a wishing well for the damned. He knelt beside it and placed his hand on the rim. The fountain whispered his name in reverse. He was not Brother Thorn anymore. He it was Echo, echo of sins, echo of sacrifice, echo of kings. From the roots below, the ground pulsed, something stirred, and then he saw it. Buried beneath glass roots, encased in crystal resin, was a child's skeleton, curled like a seed. In its tiny fingers, a single daisy fresh, untouched, white as guilt. It had grown. The garden had lied. One flower had bloomed here, unseen by all but the dead. Thorn wept not from grief, but recognition. He had seen that daisy before. In a portrait, in the hand of a girl the books called a myth. The child's queen had planted something before dying. Not rebellion, not revenge, but memory. The seed was never truth. It was witness. He stood. The wind howled backward. Above him, the sky cracked not. From storm, but from awareness. The palace itself had begun to sink into the dirt of the garden. Its towers, bent toward the earth, like mourners. Its windows cried ink. Statues fell inward. The very stone remembered what it had been built over. Graves, and now it wanted forgiveness. But stone cannot confess. Thorn Echo walked to the fountain and dropped his melted candle into its mouth. It hissed. Smoke rose, and the coins shimmered. From the fog stepped every name he had ever read backward. They didn't scream. They didn't accuse. They bowed. Thousands of unspoken monarchs lined in rows, each holding a daisy that had never bloomed. They were the garden now. And Thorn, trembling, took the child's daisy from beneath the glass and placed it behind his ear. Then he lit the garden, not with flame, but with truth. It was unbearable. Light poured from the soil like blood. Names echoed through the roots. The vines rose like snakes and choked the sky. The palace buckled. The chapel fell. The thrones cracked. And in the chamber below, the 12 kings turned to dust. The 13th throne dissolved into birth. The story ended, but not before one more thing grew. Where Thon stood nothing, where he fell something a single daisy, rooted in ash, petals open, unbowed witness.